All right. Well, dobry utro to you, Tuberovsky. And thank you once again for choosing YouTube as your form of communication. We're going to start this off with a little breakfast here. Damn it. Well, so much for that. So anyway, I assume most of you living in the US and A are familiar with the Pledge of Allegiance. There's a lot of controversy about the phrase "under God," added in 1954 or thereabouts, but there's been little fuss up to now about its conclusion with liberty and justice for all. The Pledge of Allegiance has always contained that concluding phrase from the day it was written by Francis Bellamy in 1892, a Baptist minister, author, and editor, and socialist. Yes, for a Christian American like Reverend Bellamy, there was no contradiction between freedom and socialism. So dominant has capital become in the U.S., so brainwashed its cultural consumers, so falsified has been the teachings of its history that most of its citizens really believe that socialism and freedom are mutually exclusive. But Azov, look at how socialism played out in Russia and China and North Korea and Sweden. Well, fuck that one. And Cuba. How can you possibly make such a sweeping statement and use the ignorant ravings of an American Baptist preacher as your starting point? To which I say, if Pol Pot's Cambodia is your idea of true socialism, then you won't mind me saying here that Pinochet's Chile is the true face of Western capitalism. That if you believe in free market economics, you must have a terror and torture state to keep the masses in violent subjection. But Azov, you don't see that in the USA, and that's my point. Two independent variables, state violence and economic forms of production and distribution, do not necessarily operate on cause and effect terms. If it's hypocritical for me to say capitalism equals Pinochet, then so it is for you to insist that socialism equals Pol Pot, Mao, Stalin, Ceausescu, or whatever favorite boogeyman you scare your daughter with. Yeah, well, find an example of socialism which isn't based on terror and torture and stuff, besides Sweden. Fuck that. Well, how about Chile again, under its socialist president Salvador Allende, who tried to operate a socialist democracy until stabbed in the back by a military coup that destroyed all political as well as social democracy and imposed radical free market reforms by terror, torture, and secret murder. Look, we're getting nowhere with this comparative stuff. Yeah, well, whatever. The truth is that while it's easy to write horror stories about socialism emerging in poor countries, usually as the result of devastating wars, it's also true that socialism originated as a movement to protect the personal freedoms, human rights, and public accountability of the average citizen against predatory, private, and all too often secret interests, like his employer, his banker, who will turn him into a slave grinding away with only the paper right to freedom of conscience, but denied all access to government redress of injustice. That mission is still alive and well because the injustice that birthed it has never gone away. There's no question of the birth certificate of injustice and exploitation in a free market system. Socialism originated when Oliver Twist walked up to Mr. Bumble, manager of the contract outsourced charity-funded parish workhouse, held up his mush bowl and asked, "Please, sir, I'd like some more." The anti-socialist crowd has been fighting that simple human request for nearly 2 centuries. If that request has subsequently taken the form of a demand made at gunpoint, if Oliver Twist in power came too often to resemble Mr. Bumble, ultimately whose fault is that but that of Milton Friedman, the Koch brothers, Ronald Reagan, the likes of von Mises and Hayek, all the promoters of property rights over human rights, corporate personhood against the personhood of living persons, the rich individual over the poor individual, in the name of all liberty and justice for me and to hell with you. That's their Pledge of Allegiance. Uh-oh, a knock upon my phone. Hello? Frederick Douglass? You just wanted to add that just as the American chattel slave was not freed without direct federal intervention against the right of property, so American wage slaves won't achieve their rights without intervention against the dictatorship of capital property. Wait a minute. Weren't you a Republican in your lifetime? Ah, yes, as an ex-slave you can't produce a birth certificate, and no wonder they don't recognize you.